And we're going to move on to Fred Becker. And Fred, you're going to cue me. There you go.
Hi.
And you cue me when you want me to start the movie.
Okay, yeah, go ahead. Start it now.
Okay, so we have a little under movie that we're going to play here.
Well, thank you, Joe. My story is that I've been interested in space since a very young age. And when I was in high school, I managed to get a vacation and got down to watch the launch of Apollo 16. And that was a great adventure. I had to make a 1,000-mile trip and camped out in Titusville and everything, and saw the launch. And if you go to YouTube and search for Apollo 16 home movie, you'll see my photographs, and I actually recorded Martin Caden as he called the launch. And so that was a tremendous adventure. And so then I went on to college and took engineering, and I was able to get a job at McDonnell Douglas Astronautics in St. Louis. But in 1979, I made a trip to Kennedy Space Center. Once again, it was my second time there, and took the bus tour, and the Shuttle Enterprise was on the pad. When I saw that Shuttle Enterprise on the pad, it was a sort of like a life-changing moment. I decided I had to work on that program, and so I transferred from McDonnell Douglas in St. Louis to Johnson Space Center, and there I was working on the space shuttle in 1980. And so I was able to I worked in electronics and avionics for about a year before the first launch. And so I was learning about all of the NASA procedures and acronyms. And the shuttle had lots of problems. The engines were not working right, and the tiles were hard to mount onto the shuttle and so forth. But and then there were 7,000 issues with it that were like in the critical items list book. So basically I was, a very young engineer, and it was up to me. I would not have said go for launch, but I was there learning things. So I was invited to be part of mission control for the first launch in the engineering back rooms. And I was on avionics in the third shift. And but so I was not on shift for launch, so I did go to the press room to watch the launch, and the entire press corps was shouting "Go, go, go" right here when they were launching, and it was just a tremendous experience. And so right after launch, I walked over to the VIP room in Mission Control, and was able to look through the glass and see Max Faget and Chris Kraft and all the great leaders experiencing our very first shuttle launch. And I got to see the payload bay doors open when they first opened. So so anyway, I worked on third shift in the engineering room, and my job was to keep a log of all the avionics events, like when the crew would throw a switch, or they would change systems and so forth, and do a report on avionics every 4 hours that we sent on to mission control. And one of my great memories from that was Max Faget visited the room, and at one point he asked to use my telephone to talk to somebody. So there was Max Faget. If anybody doesn't know, he was the designer of the Apollo and Mercury and Shuttle and everything, and he was the head of engineering at Johnson Space Center. So that was very cool that here I am, just a young engineer, and here's Max Faget using my telephone. So, and then also sitting next to me was like some of the Apollo mission control people. Like one guy had been right next to the guy that called the 1201, 1202 alarm calls. He was right next to that guy during Apollo 11 landing. And so everything on the mission went pretty well. And then we had the reentry. And for the reentry, I went to the auditorium and watched it from there on the big screen. And that was just tremendous that it all worked. And so this movie here that you're watching, this is their post-flight press conference, and they're showing their highlight films. So if you go to YouTube, you can listen in on what they're saying here. So this is just the STS-1 post-flight press conference. It's on the NSS YouTube channel. And so anyway, I happened to be in the audience while this film was being presented for the first time. And so here's Crippen talking about how easily it is to get around inside the shuttle. So here he's going from the lower deck up to the flight deck. And so anyway, I worked on several more shuttle missions, and then I worked at other space centers. I worked at Marshall Space Flight Center and Kennedy Space Center, and I've had a pretty interesting career. So anyway, that's about my story.
Thank you, Fred. So we're just going to watch the rest of this really fascinating film, and it's almost over here. But they're actually doing the reentry at this minute, and you can see in the distance a little bit of color in the ground area, and you can see some of the details. But soon they're going to be landing. I remember very clearly watching the space shuttle land, and it was just fascinating. And actually, I heard the space shuttle as it did a sonic boom over California when it came in there, and thought I saw it. It was very, very high, but I thought I saw it, and I was outside looking frantically everywhere to see it. I heard the boom, so I remember that. You know, we tend to think that everything stopped when we went to the moon 50 years ago, but the space shuttle is what happened next. And because of the space shuttle, we also had the International Space Station, and we also had the Hubble telescope, which we'll celebrate a bit later in the program. So this was a very, very integral part of the whole movement into space of the human race. And it's an incredible, if you look at that picture right there of this thing coming down, it's just an amazing idea that this spacecraft was built and did, considering all the issues that came along the way and getting it built in the first place. One of the things they remarked of in the film was how smooth everything went for the astronauts on board. And of course, we've had our series of tragedies that resulted from things, but that's also the name of the space program, that we do our very, very best to protect people, but you can't always be successful. And I always want to remember the pioneers. I always want to remember the ones that gave their lives, gave their all to help us move forward, help the human race move forward into a future that can be something to the betterment, literally, of all mankind. I think that's what we're here for. So as we watch the very last elements of this footage here in the space shuttle, I just want us to remember the sacrifice of so many people to accomplish these wonderful goals. So again, thank you, Fred, so much. And I'm going to stop the share because that's about the end of it right there. And there you go, folks. Okay, so thank you, Fred. It was a great presentation. We're going to ask Fred questions, and I'm going to just keep recording again. So let's see if I got any Q&As for Fred here. Okay, I just found the Q&A button. Arthur Clarke and a Follow Mundos had a major space station at the L1 point to support lunar operations. He says, isn't that a better place for it? Unfortunately, I don't know what it means. So maybe Gerald, if you're listening, you can type out what the statement was that you were responding to. Let's see if there's any other questions in the chat window here. And a lot of compliments, Fred.
Well, thanks everybody.
And questions. What was the most memorable part of your career, Fred?
Wow, that's a good question. I'll tell you what, the liftoff of STS-1, that was pretty memorable, with all the press shouting "Go, go, go." That was really amazing. It took off like a Corvette.
and you were literally in a very special place to see it. So that was also, I really appreciate you sharing that with us. Fred, were you involved in the Intelsat 6 rescue mission? And who are your favorite astronauts you got to meet?
Ah, I think I was just involved with like the first 7 or so shuttle missions. Um, they're all really cool. STS-3 I have lots of memories of that one too. Um, and my favorite astronaut, gosh, I sure love meeting Gene Cernan. That guy was so great.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll
And
go
then,
with that for now.
and let's see. And then Andrew Tubbs asks, did you see any serious warning signs being ignored while you were working on the shuttle? Ah,
Well, I'll tell you what, I did actually try to stop a launch one day. This was before Challenger happened, and one of the solid rocket booster gyros failed pre-launch, which is, very concessional for control. And so we launched with more risk than normal. But if you were up to me, I did try to stop that launch, but I was overridden. So yeah, that
well,
was crossing my fingers all through that liftoff.
okay. What else? Yeah, I think that's about the last of the questions, Fred. So thank you so much again.